Well, the alarm bells, by the way, should be absolutely ringing right now. This Albanese government has seen its green schemes collapsing, right? And investors walking away, and in desperation today, announced it's going to loot our nation's super fund. It's going to bet that money meant to pay for public servants' pensions. It's going to bet some of that on net zero, on its net zero scheme. Treasurer Jim Chalmers said it's changing the mandate, the rules for this future fund. A $230 billion investment fund that's actually meant to earn as much as possible to pay for the unfunded super public servants. He wants to change it so that it will now look at investment and think, green, we should have more of that money invested in green schemes.
We have said to the Future Fund, and we've worked with them closely behind the scenes before this announcement today, to make sure that where they are weighing up investments which have similar rates of return and similar risk profiles, that it would be in Australia's interest to make sure we're continuing to build housing stock, we're continuing to get the energy transformation right, and we're hardening our infrastructure.
Jim Chalmers says, don't worry, the Future Fund's still going to make the same money. It's just saying, with the same return, if you've got two options, go the green one. But this, the opposition's been really fuming today, but I've got to say that this socialist approach was always going to come. Chalmers warned of this. He wrote in a much mocked essay a couple of years ago about how he was going to rescue capitalism after the pandemic. He wrote that how do we build this more inclusive and resilient economy, increasingly powered by cleaner and cheaper energy, with a new values-based capitalism for Australia. Jim Chalmers capitalism, where what he really means is that the government decides, not you, the government decides where your money gets invested, or actually spent. Now, the two previous chairmen of this future fund, former top banker David Murray and former Treasurer Peter Costello, they would never have agreed to this. In fact, both today lashed out. Costello, who actually created this fund, set it up when he was the nation's treasurer, said it would now be used as a political slush fund and would lose money. But today, the chairman of this future fund is Greg Combet, the former Labor Environment Minister, the man who gave us the carbon tax, and he's been all for using this money. He once said, we need this green investment.
Hundreds of billions of dollars in investment will be needed to achieve net zero. Green hydrogen, green metals, green manufacturing. There are opportunities like this in other industrial regions around the country.
You heard the problem there already. If this guy's now going to be investing the nation's savings on green schemes, because that first so-called opportunity he mentioned, green hydrogen, that's actually a disaster. Now, the government says, yes, green hydrogen, that's exactly what we want. A gas made by pumping huge amounts of wind and solar power through water. That is our big hope.
Our green hydrogen future is fundamental to that clean energy future.
But big energy companies like Origin, Woodside and Andrew Forrest Fortescue have since walked away from this government's planned hydrogen hub, saying it's just too expensive to make work. And so, there it goes. You see the problem. As soon as you base investment decisions on green dreams and unproven technologies that you'd really love to be true, you risk chasing dreams and not dollars. Well, joining me is a former chairman of that future fund that the government wants to loot, David Murray. David Murray, thanks for your time. The last head of the future fund, Peter Costello, has called this move a political slush fund. What's your reaction to the government's plan?
Well, that's exactly what this move of the government makes the future fund appear to be. It was never the subject of politicisation of its investments. It allows the government to invest in its own public projects off the budget, and that's not a good thing for the transparency of the future fund. It's not a good thing for their long-term returns. it undoes all the work of that we put in since 2006 to get this set up with a fantastic international reputation.
Now, the Treasurer today did say you're wrong when you say that returns will fall as a result. Here he is.
But David Murray is not on this occasion correct. He is factually wrong to make the comments that he is making. The fund will be required to consider the national priorities in its investment decisions where possible, where appropriate and consistent with strong returns.
So is the Treasurer right that the Future Fund can have its cake and still eat it, can go green and still make money?
Well, it depends what the purpose of the investment is. For example, if a government were to invest in infrastructure that is expensive to build and does not make an apparent return in its own right, but on the other hand makes a fantastic contribution to productivity and tax revenue in the future, then those returns come back to the taxpayers. But that is not what the Future Fund is about, because investments of that nature will distort the asset allocation. They create illiquidity in those types of investments because they are very long term. And the Future Fund already has a dynamic asset allocation policy which has stood it in good stead for all its years. This will distort the asset allocation and therefore must distort the returns. So to ask the Future Fund to do this but not change the return target just does not make sense.
David, here's my problem with this, right? We've seen so many green schemes go belly up. They were sold as big stuff. The government's hydrogen plans right now, a lot of investors are suddenly walking away from it after saying this was the future, even Andrew Forrest. The problem I get with the green dream is that it seems to distort people's thinking, that they, that it gets them all confused about the money value, looking at it hard, the hard, cold cash of the thing. Is that your problem too, that salvation seekers shouldn't be let anywhere near a future fund?
Well, exactly, because it confuses the purpose of the fund, puts the board in an impossible position on calculating the optimum asset allocation and achieving their target. These type of investments should be in the public sector, and then they must be subject to public scrutiny through cost-benefit analysis. When governments start to invest this way, doesn't it indicate really that they're not prepared to go through the process of a public cost-benefit analysis?
That's a very good point. And finally, what is the government actually gambling with here, this future fund and all these billions? How important is it and how bad is it if it goes wrong?
Well, Peter Costello set this up because the government had significant liabilities, and not just in unfunded public pension schemes, but in other areas, including things like defaults on HECS or whatever's in their own government portfolio. But he having got rid of all of the debt, Peter then wanted to cover these types of liabilities with a fund like this. It is not a pension fund in its own right. It is just a savings fund that's set up for future generations. Now, once you start tinkering with it, the whole notion of its independence, of its performance, falls into disrepair. And the Future Fund has been incredibly well regarded internationally for what it's achieved and for the structure and the nature of its purpose and objective, return objective. So this starts to undo all of that. And, if the government was honest, they'd have taken the money out of the Future Fund and invested it in their projects, and being honest with the electorate about why these investments are important.
David Murray, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.